Hello, everyone. Happy National Fossil Day. We're going to wait for just a second to make sure that we are streaming everywhere we need to be streaming. I think that we are. Oops, let me check this out. All right, looks like we're good. So welcome to our virtual National Fossil Day, or welcome back if you've joined us for some of our other events this morning and early afternoon. If you haven't had a chance to join us here for Virtual National Fossil Day this year, or so far today, you can always go back and see the videos that are archived on whatever platform you're watching on right now. So if you're watching on a Facebook page or a YouTube channel, wherever you're watching, the videos from today have been archived in that space. So make sure to go back and visit those. My name's Allie Sorley. I'm the Education Outreach Coordinator at the Alabama Museum of Natural History. And today we are celebrating National Fossil Day. Happy National Fossil Day, everybody. My favorite holiday. We are celebrating today with paleontologists and with filmmakers and with classrooms and with students and with lots of people who just love fossils and everything fossils. So we're glad that you're here with us. Make sure if you have any questions today about anything that we're talking about, pop a question in the comments and we can see it and pop it up on screen and talk about it. But we are joined today to talk about Paleozoic Oceans with Dr. Alberto Perez-Huerta. So welcome, Alberto. How are you?
Hello, Ali. Glad to be here.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us. I think we mentioned, or I know that we mentioned before at the 10 o'clock one, that the National Fossil Day is put on by the U.S. National Park Service, and they always encourage science centers and museums and schools to celebrate with events and activities, and they always choose a theme. And this year's theme is Paleozoic Oceans, and so we just happen to have someone on campus who knows a little bit about Paleozoic Oceans, and that is Alberto right here. So we're excited to bring him on to kind of teach us a little bit about what that all means. So I think we should probably pretend like this is the actual ocean and just jump in both feet. What do you think?
That sounds good. So yeah, I could like to introduce a little bit myself.
Yes, do.
So I'm currently an associate professor in the Department of Geological Sciences at the University of Alabama, and I'm also the curator of invertebrate paleontology at the Alabama Museum of Natural Sciences here on campus as well. I'm originally from Spain, from northern Spain, a small province, and I came 20 years ago to the United States to do my PhD, looking at fossil brachiopods from the Carboniferous rocks of Nevada and Utah. And when we talk a little bit about the Paleozoic, you will see how these, fossils and this geological time relates to Paleozoic oceans. So yeah, I'm very happy to be here and to answering some questions and from the audience.
It seems like we found the right person. So, okay. Let's go ahead and just kind of go back to basics for this whole thing. Can you just help us understand? So, like I said, the theme is Paleozoic Oceans. Can you help us understand what that means? What does Paleozoic mean?
Okay, Paleozoic is a term we use in geology to refer to a geological time that goes basically from about 545 million years ago to about 248 million years ago. And you can see it here, and it's divided in what we call periods. That will be from the oldest to the youngest, the Cambrian, Ordovician, Silurian, Devonian, and then we have the Carboniferous, is divided in the Mississippian and Pennsylvanian, and then the Permian. Strictly speaking, Paleozoic means all life. So this is a period in geological history in which we start having lots of evidence of life. So before the Paleozoic, you look at rocks that are older than the Paleozoic, and you can hardly find any fossils. No fossil enthusiasts or collectors go and look for fossils in rocks that are older than the Paleozoic. But then when you start looking at Cambrian rocks, you start finding a lot of fossils of this time. Most of these fossils are of marine settings like oceans. And the reason is because, as if you can see today, most of our basically our planet is covered in water, and that was even more the case in the past. So most of the record we have of life, it comes from marine sediments and marine settings. So that's why the Paleozoic oceans are so important to understand life, or kind of the life during the Paleozoic, and kind of this old life, this beginning of life in our geological record.
Would you say it's the age of marine life?
I will say it's definitely the age of marine life, but um, there are other important events that happened during the Paleozoic related to the evolution of life.
Mm.
So there are, I would say overall, there are three major events that are important. So there are two moments in the Paleozoic, one at the beginning of the Cambrian and one at the beginning of the Ordovician, that those are times where we see uh, lots of fossils appearing and new fossils and new life forms. And we tend to call these events like origination, biodiversification events. Is suddenly when we have a boom of life. And that's recorded in the rocks because suddenly we see a lot of fossils, but different types of fossils. So, for example, in the Ordovician, we start seeing corals. Uh, um, so these things appear kind of new out of the blue, right? And then we have, on contrast, we have three events that happen during the Paleozoic that are the opposite. Is what we call extinction events. So these are moments where we have record of mass mortality of organisms. So organisms that were thriving and they were living in the ocean, suddenly they disappear. And you know, death is part of life, and we have these normal kind of organisms die, but when they basically dying at rates that are much higher to what you will have in normal conditions, is when we have these mass extinction events. So we have three of those important events. So throughout the Phanerozoic, so basically the period that goes from the beginning of the Cambrian to the present, we have several of these mass extinction, and three of them are in the Paleozoic. So one is at the end of the Ordovician, and this one people related to glaciation, kind of climate change, and suddenly many organisms that were thriving in the Ordovician oceans, they suddenly die out and they disappear. We have another one at the end of the Devonian. Um, this is related, mainly people have related this to lack of oxygen or absence of oxygen in the oceans, and people have been linking that to a lot of volcanoes or volcanoes erupting, and sort of a lot of changes that in climate that basically remove oxygen from the oceans, and many organisms die. And then there's one at the end of the Permian, we call it end of the Permian mass extinction, and that marks the end of the Paleozoic. And in this one, we estimated that about 96% of all the species of all the organisms that were living at that time, they suddenly disappeared. So we were in the brink of complete extinction. So almost all the life in this planet is thought to almost disappear at that time. And that one has been linked to most recently to a lot of volcanic events, a lot of volcanisms, also absence of oxygen in the oceans, but this is still a lot of debate about what were the causes. So for all of these events, there seem to be multiple causes for these mass mortality events. But in terms of the oceans, that's kind of the overall picture, and we can talk about the fossils and the animals you can find in a minute. But on land, we start having changes. So also, Ordovician, we start having evidences of the first terrestrial plants. Most of these were kind of like aquatic, little kind of aquatic lilies and little plants. We have moss, we have other things coming up. And then we start having records of fish coming up as well, kind of terrestrial fish, the ones you will find in rivers and lakes. And then in the Devonian, we start having more of this vegetation, and we start finding amphibians. So things like salamanders and all of those derive from fish. And then more towards the Carboniferous, we start having the big forests, the forests that eventually are going to produce the swamps, lots of trees, and are going to give eventually rise to coal deposits that we can find here in Alabama. So there are a lot of events related to life evolution during the Paleozoic. So it's a really important time in Earth's history in terms of life evolution.
So I like that. It was interesting what you said, because the theme is Paleozoic Oceans, but it makes me, or it's good to remind yourself that there was some freshwater then too. It wasn't all just ocean, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there was aquatic life that survived that wasn't in saltwater environments, like marine environments rather, like ocean environments. And I also really like, so I think going back to the extinction events, I think everyone thinks of like the extinction, like the dinosaur extinction. So I don't know that we give a lot of thought to the other extinction events in our history, in the planet's history. And it's interesting to hear them and all the different, possible reasons for them. I mean, lack of oxygen is not one that I ever would have thought about as an
if you remove, most of the biodiversity you have in the oceans today is kind of concentrated in the first, I will say, although there's much to be explored in terms of deep ocean, and we don't know much about biodiversity in the oceans, but we know that there's a lot of that concentrated in the first kind of 100 meters of the water column. And that's where you have a lot of organisms doing photosynthesis and creating oxygen. So these waters tend to be very well oxygenated waters. So the oxygen is really important for organisms to thrive and survive. The moment you remove even a little bit of oxygen, then many of these organisms start basically suffering, they start dying out. And once you start removing different, what we call trophic levels, different parts of the food chain, that affects the whole ecosystem. So if you think about, for us, for example, our atmosphere has about 21% oxygen content. And that 21%, if we will decrease that a little bit, then we will be in trouble. And you see it when we go, for example, we go to altitude, we climb a mountain and suddenly we are out of breath, right? There's a little bit less oxygen. We are still within that 21%, but we have our capacity to get oxygen. We struggle more. So imagine if you had that change, you climb a mountain and you struggle getting oxygen. Imagine if suddenly you remove a lot of oxygen or create these conditions. So organisms in the ocean really suffer from that.
Or if you're like me and you're from Florida and live in Alabama and then go and visit Denver, and you get a little problem with it too.
And obviously the mass extinction that is more known to people is the end of Cretaceous because dinosaurs disappear. But in terms of magnitude, we think about 76%. It's difficult to estimate these things, but about 75% of the species disappeared at that time, including dinosaurs. When we talk about the Permian, we are close to almost 100%, right? So in terms of magnitude, the end of Permian mass extinction was the biggest extinction we've ever had in our history, as in terms of life and life evolution.
Man, these Paleozoic oceans had a lot going on.
Yeah.
Does Alabama have any rock formations or fossils from this time period?
Yeah. So Alabama, let's say, just to place people in context, right now we are kind of in like subtropical type of region of the planet, right? And that's why we have this wonderful hot, humid weather. But at that point, at the beginning of the Paleozoic, Alabama was a little bit more, was at the equator or southern of the equator. They was basically underwater. And it was under an ocean was called Iapetus Ocean. So the Cambrian and Ordovician, we have rocks that are mainly marine. So the record we have of the Paleozoic is marine, and we start having different types of marine fossils in the Cambrian. And the Cambrian is represented in Alabama, mainly in the northern part. Then the Ordovician, we have some in the central part and also northern part. So there are Ordovician deposits that are marine around Oneonta, that area, and also close to here to Tuscaloosa, Pratt's Ferry.
Oh, yeah.
And we have Ordovician rocks. And then Silurian is still marine, so we are still kind of underwater, but we are progressively moving more northern, kind of, because the land masses kind of move and the oceans, and so at that point Alabama is kind of still underwater, but we are kind of getting more towards the equator. And Alabama will get this more or less its current position by the Carboniferous. So during the Silurian, we have also marine deposits with fossils. And one thing is really important for the economy of this state is we have these red formations, so red mountains. If you've been to Birmingham, then you see the red mountain there, and those are deposits are rich in iron, and there's basically heavy concentration of iron, and it's an iron ore, those rocks. And the combination of that iron ore, then the marine limestones, marine deposits we have of the lower Carboniferous, the Mississippian, close to that area, and the coal we have of the upper part of the Carboniferous, the Pennsylvanian, are the three components you need to actually produce a steel. So the iron, the coal, and the limestone are the fundamental components to form steel, and that's the reason why Birmingham is today what it is, all the steel manufacturing, because of the geology. And this is very similar to where I am from in Spain, in Asturias, where we have similar rocks. And also we are known for coal production and steel manufacturing because of the same reason. Once we start moving more towards the Devonian, the record starts getting very poor. We mainly have terrestrial rocks, one part in kind of the eastern part of the state, and only towards the end of the Devonian, we have the formation called the Chattanooga Shale. This is northeast part. And in that, we start having these records of these anoxic events. So these lack of oxygen. So there's a lot of sediments are shales. They are very dark in color. And these are indication of lack of oxygen. And those are basically the ones that start recording this extinction event at the end of the Devonian that we talk about. And so we don't have much of the Devonian. And then the Carboniferous, we have very good representation. We have carbonates, so marine rocks that are very abundant in the lower part of the Carboniferous, the Mississippian. And some of these are the ones that are processed by companies like Vulcan to, for road building, road construction, railroads. And those are full of fossils. And I can show you some of the fossils for all of these things. And then towards the end of the Carboniferous, the Pennsylvanian, suddenly we don't have marine rocks, are mainly terrestrial, and we have what we call near-shore environments, will be environments close to the coast. And this is where we have these trees, these swamps, and eventually is what is going to give rise to coal. And of the Permian, that is very fascinating period of the Paleozoic, we don't have record in Alabama. So we don't have any rocks of, at least we know of Permian age here in Alabama. So those were basically eroded away. They disappear from the record. We don't have a record. Right? So if we talk about fossils, I can show you some of these and how they look like. So in the Cambrian and Ordovician, we have these marine fossils, and we have things that are called brachiopods, and these are kind of seashells, similar to what will be clams today. I have different versions of them. different shapes. I mean, I can show them here. There's another one here. Different shapes. So these had two valves. They have a top valve, we call it dorsal, ventral valve, and these were basically attached to the substrate or to rocks or to other animals, and they were just filtered in the water currents and basically getting nutrients out of the water like this. And these are brachiopods. These are my favorite type of fossils, and these are the ones that I actually study for my PhD in Nevada and Utah.
You just answered one of our questions. Look.
Yeah, brachiopods are my favorite. And then, but I studied those of the Carboniferous. Then we have Trilobites, and I'm going to pull out one that is really big here. These are arthropods. They are similar to, they are of the same group of lobsters and insects. And this will be similar to kind of roaches or beetles, but they were living in the ocean. Some of them we know they were predators. Some of them were, digging in the ocean floor, in the mud to look for things to eat. We start having corals. So these little holes here is where the little corallites, the little polyps, will be living. So we have those, but also we have solitary corals. They look like these horn kind of structures. They were sitting in the bottom floor and they were filtering the water. And these were typical of Cambrian Ordovician. And then once we move to the Mississippian, to these Carboniferous, we start having the same things: corals, brachiopods, bryozoans, and we have things like crinoids. I have one here. This, and I made a sketch. It's not easy to see them, but it will be something like this. These are basically animals. They get attached to the bottom floor or to a substrate, and then the water currents come through, and they use those bristles you see here to actually filter the water and get nutrients out of that. And we have a spectacular fossils of these crinoids. They are related to sea urchins, starfish. They are echinoderms. And then once we go into the top part of the Carboniferous, the Pennsylvanian, this is from the Postmill Formation, we start having terrestrial fossils. This is part of a bark of a tree. And these are some of the leaves as well. And you see these kind of darker colors. This is what is going to give rise eventually to coal and coal formations that are very important to the economy of the state of Alabama. And these are some of the fossils. We have other ones that are more strange. This thing looks like a stick here, was part of the plankton, the marine plankton that was floating in the water. This was eaten by other animals. This is called a graptolite. So we have different types of marine fossils and also terrestrial fossils. Also, the Pennsylvanian is very well known for insects, insect wings, tracks of reptiles, amphibians. So we have a very good record of fossils of the Paleozoic in Alabama.
Those were incredible. I loved all of those fossils. We actually have a question about something you talked about. Someone asked if you wouldn't mind talking about the difference between brachiopods and bivalves.
Okay. Yeah. So there, from the external look of it, you can tell a bivalve, a clam, from a brachiopod based on the symmetry. So in a clam, if you get both valves, the left and the right, the symmetry is between both valves, right? So you take you can probably have seen it in the beach. You can take the left one and the right one, and they are mirror images of each other. So the symmetry goes in the middle. In the case of brachiopods, one of the valves, at least this type of brachiopods, you see is poking out here, tends to be larger than the other one. And the plane of symmetry is through the middle of the valves, right? So in this case, if you take apart the bottom valve, the ventral valve, and the dorsal valve, they are of different sizes. So the symmetry goes through the middle. This is the easiest way to tell the difference between a brachiopod and a clam. In terms of biology, they are quite different. So the clams filter the water to get nutrients as well, but they tend to do it. They have structures. They have, some of them have kind of siphonals. They have these tubes and they filter the water through it. Brachiopods are more complex because they have, and I'm going to sketch quickly here. See if.
Thank you for these sketches. They're very helpful.
Yeah. Okay.
I appreciate it. And also much better than the stick figures that I could possibly provide.
Yeah. So okay. Let's see if I can do it.
Yeah, no, they are one of the crinoids was very helpful to help visualize.
Okay. So
there it is.
Brachiopods, what they have, and they have something inside called lophophore, and this is a structure that, think of like if you are kind of sticking like a tongue, and it has, but instead of made of something solid, it has a small bristles, like if they were hairs. And what they do with that is they kind of generate currents, water currents, and then out of those water currents, they filter the nutrients they want. They can get things like diatoms and things like that. So brachiopods are closely related to other thing called bryozoans, and because they have this lophophore structure, this structure for feeding that these look like hairs or bristles that come out. They are very complex animals in the sense that they have something equivalent to a kidney, they have something equivalent to a heart, they have a complex kind of neural kind of system. And the thing with them is that we know that they appear at even before the base of the Cambrian. We have evidence of them, and we can find them in the oceans today. So they have survived for more than 500 million years, and they haven't changed much. So you can find brachiopods today off the coast of Brazil or Scotland or in Antarctic waters, and they look very similar. The biology is very similar to what it was 500 million years ago. So they found something that works for them. I would say is one of the most successful type of organisms you can find in terms of surviving all these extinction events, and basically not changing their biology. Is the same. It's been the same for 500 million years. And so that's the main distinction in terms of the biology. There are other distinctions, but I'm trying to simplify it. But that's how you can tell brachiopods from clams, and in terms of the feeding and the internal structure, the organs and what they have is quite different between clams, let's say a mussel, or something like an oyster than a brachiopod is.
I had no idea that they had sort of, I mean, I know simplified, but internal organs. That's kind of incredible, especially for an organism. I mean, because I think about mussels and clams, and they don't. And I'm no biologist, like a mussel biologist, but from what I understand, they don't have those structures, like you said.
No.
And there's very simplified, like light receptors kind of things, and but nothing. Nothing like a neural network or anything like that, which is kind of interesting.
Well, also from the culinary point of view, which is not but like the clams and the mussels, with then oysters, they have a lot of flesh. Brachiopods, they don't have much inside. I mean, they have very little, the part of the organs, they have very strong muscles to close the valves, and then they have this basically hairy structure to do feeding. So we know that things in the past tried to eat brachiopods, but people argue that probably they were not tasting very good, and they were not much to chew on. Put it that way.
Right. Can we shift gears a little bit and talk about trilobites just a bit?
Yeah.
Okay, so first off, trilobites are one of my very favorite animals of all time. Someone had a question about trilobites, and they asked if where you could find largest trilobites in Alabama. So as far as I know, the trilobites that are found in Alabama are on the smaller side. Am I right about that?
Yeah, they are on the
Okay.
smaller side. In fact, the ones you can find in the Cambrian tend to be very small. I will say the size of my fingernail. They are tend to be also. I'm sketching again. They tend to be very simple. So there's something that looks like that's. I try to make it a bit like to scale. They are something like that. They have the kind of the cephalon, the head. Let me see if I can point it right. And then they have a couple of thoracic segments, and then kind of the tail part. And they tend to be very small, as far as I can tell. I have found some here in Alabama, but all of them are very small. I could do a bit more digging, but they are not big. I mean, you cannot find this. You cannot
Yeah,
find
the
something like
one you showed was not, yeah.
no. You cannot find this thing here in Alabama, unfortunately, because I know trilobites will be equivalent to being the dinosaurs of the Paleozoic. It's a type of fossil that everybody likes, mainly because you can have all different type of shapes, forms. It's very spectacular. Some of them have very exceptional preserved eyes, multiple lenses. I study some trilobites as well as part of my research, and I understand the fascination, right? But then if you think about it, okay, these are like, the roaches of the ocean. I hate roaches. So if you think it that way, that might not sound as sexy as. No, as far as I can tell, no. The trilobites, to have exceptional preservation of trilobites is relatively rare to a given point. And then tend to get very large in the Ordovician. We don't have the type of rocks where here in Alabama we tend to have more the kind of these limestones. I mean, this is from the Mississippian, but we tend to have these kind of chunky limestones. We have a lot of the corals, things like that, but we don't tend to have the right conditions for trilobites to be found, unfortunately. So they tend to be smaller. But I can find more if that person is interested. I can find the specific formations that will have some trilobites.
And the trilobite that you were sketching, like the smaller ones that we find, though that wasn't the juvenile, right? That would have been an adult sized.
That will be an adult size of it. Yeah. Being the Cambrian, you tend to have trilobites that, I mean, I will classify them in two groups. You tend to have ones that are very small, like that one, and then you tend to have another ones that are much larger. They tend to have spines coming out of the head. And then in the Ordovician is when they kind of go crazy. They start experimenting with new body plans, and some of them they have like massive heads, massive tails. Some of them they lose their eyes. Some of them have really big eyes. They stick out like antennae coming out of their heads. It's like they decided to go wild and crazy for a while. And then many of those families of trilobites, they disappear at the end of the Ordovician extinction event. And then they start recovering in the Silurian. And then in the Devonian is like a new resurgence of trilobites. And trilobites kind of, within, they went from being kind of predators to try to escape from prey. So one thing that happens in the Devonian is suddenly we start having a lot of fish, marine fish. We develop some sharks. They are not the same as today, but we have these fish, and those fish start becoming the predator. So then suddenly we see trilobites with a lot of well-developed eye lenses for kind of 3D vision, with possibility of even recognizing colors. We see them with a lot of spikes and spines coming out of the skeleton, thicker kind of shells. So they start becoming more armor in a way to defend from predators. While in the Cambrian or the Ordovician, you could argue they were more the ones preying on other things, right? And then after the end of the Devonian extinction event, the kind of the trilobites pretty much disappear. There's only one group that continues a little bit for the Carboniferous and the Permian. So if you are interested in finding trilobites, you will have to look at Cambrian, Ordovician, Silurian, and Devonian rocks, because then it's very difficult to find them.
So it sounds like they don't have any direct relatives today.
No, the closest thing will be like a horseshoe crab.
Okay.
Probably. I always, when I see a horseshoe crab, I think of a trilobite.
We get a lot of people that ask that question too,
Yeah,
because they have a similar shape, you know.
Yeah, so the horseshoe crab is okay. Yeah, so I'm sketching something here.
Thank you. I am really appreciative of this sketching. Thank you.
Yeah, so basically, this will be what more or less like a horseshoe crab.
Wow, you are good.
And it has kind of like you know, the head, like the trilobite, the eyes here on the side, and a bit kind of the thorax, and then they have this kind of pointy kind of tail here. Those horseshoe crabs, if you look at this trilobite, this will be something you find in the Ordovician, right? We have the head here. This will be the eyes. This one, sorry, I'm trying to orient myself here. But this eye here and this eye here, that's the head. And this is basically the thorax, the thoracic zone. And this is the tail. If you modify a little bit the tail and you move the eyes to the side, it looks more or less like a horseshoe crab, like that, right? So horseshoe crab will be something probably the closest to a trilobite today. They have found other things that tend to be soft body, and they pretty much look, they are like transparent, and also they are in marine deposits, and they look like trilobites. They're exactly looking like trilobites, but they are transparent, and they have like a flexible type of a skeleton. Is not mineralized like in the trilobites, and they pretty much look like them. They tend to be more a kind of like cold water, deeper ocean. They look like trilobites, but we know they are not related to them. But horseshoe crab will be something similar. Yeah.
So we have a couple of questions about some things that you found. Somebody asked what the largest fossil you've ever found is.
Ooh. Okay. So if you see, these are brachiopods, right? And you see my fingers here. These are the type of things I usually find, right? So they are very tiny fossils. So I will say I have found a lot of tiny things. I'm an expert on finding tiny fossils. But in terms of large fossils, I worked for a year in Thailand in a paleontological research center, and they have Cretaceous rocks there. And doing a field work exploration one time, we found a femur of what is a relative to T-Rex. It's not a T-Rex, but it's type of the same family. And I stumbled up on a femur of one of them. I actually didn't see it. I hit it and I fell over. And then when I look back, it actually was not a rock; it was a piece of bone sticking out. And if you consider that a finding, that That's my largest finding.
I think we should consider it a finding.
Okay,
Your foot found it first, but
my foot found it first. Yeah.
right. Someone asked, this might actually be the same answer, but someone asked what the heaviest fossil you found was. Is that probably it?
Yeah, that's probably it. Yeah, that's probably it.
Yeah. I would imagine that one would be a lot heavier than the brachiopods that
Yeah,
you
yeah,
work on sometimes,
yeah,
or most of the
yeah.
time.
That's probably the
Now,
heaviest.
have you ever found like a larger, like even though you work on smaller ones, have you ever found a larger version of something that you'd seen before? You know, like is there a brachiopod that you found that was surprisingly big for a brachiopod or?
Um, not really. I mean, one thing that is very spectacular here in Alabama are these kind of crinoids, that we talk about. I mean, this is, you see the scale, my fingers for a scale. This one is really tiny here, like this will be the top part. Some of the ones that can be found in the Mississippi and here can be the size of a coffee table or even larger. So some of them can be this massive. We call them today. You can find them today. Something similar. You find them in cold waters, deep waters, Antarctica. We call them sea lilies, and some of them, they can be the size of a coffee table or even larger. I mean, you have to think that these things are anchored to the seafloor, to rocks, to other things, and then they basically stick out. So that's probably the ones I've seen the largest, and some of them I've seen the largest here in Alabama, actually.
I've seen those pictures of the sea lilies. They are huge,
Hmm.
huge, and they're really neat looking. So if you guys get a chance to look up pictures of sea lilies after this, please do, because they're I mean, it's not like anything you'd ever seen before, I don't think. And some of them, because they are in like deeper, colder waters, they're almost haunting looking in the pictures. They're really neat.
Yep.
Um, someone has gone back to trilobites and horseshoe crabs, and they have a
Mhm.
great question. Are they descendant or is it convergent evolution?
Well, there are no the trilobites go extinct at the end of the Permian with the mass extinction. So we have a lot of what we call evolutionary lineages that terminate at that point. So there is no direct descendant of trilobites that we know of today. So a horseshoe crab is also part of the general kind of arthropod, where you include things like lobsters and shrimps, and so in a sense it could be convergent evolution, and they occupy an ecological niche similar to what the trilobites did in the past. There are, even if things sound familiar, like for example, let's say Paleozoic sharks, right? Those at the end of the Permian went extinct. We have new ones coming up in the Mesozoic, and they are the ones that are closely related to the ones today, right? Um, so many of these lineages terminate. So the horseshoe crab will be an example more of convergence evolution, that it will be descendant, because these actually lineages terminate at the end of the Permian because of that mass extinction. Even corals, the corals we have today in composition, they are different, and there is a debate whether the Paleozoic ones completely disappear or some of them survive and gave rise to the modern corals. And I did a study on that, and we concluded, or I'm in the camp that we think that the ones of the Paleozoic die out completely, and the ones that are present today are new forms that appear in the Mesozoic. And the main reason is because once both are made their skeleton of calcium carbonate, but ones are made of calcite, the Paleozoic ones, and then the ones we have today, they tend to they are aragonite in nature.
Okay.
It's the same chemical composition but different structure.
Huh.
Yeah.
Okay. You know, all of this has made me think back to our 10 o'clock session today where we talked to Dr. Klumpmaker about paleontology, and we asked him the question, what is paleontology? And I wonder if I could ask you that same question, because I don't know. It's good. It's been some really interesting conversation. So I'd love to hear your answer to that. What is paleontology for you?
Um, for me, paleontology, besides a way of life, because I just live from teaching and studying paleontology, uh, for me it's very important because allow us to see a dimension of life that is difficult to understand from the human perspective. So when you go to look at rocks of the Paleozoic or any kind of geological time, uh, you realize how many types of animals, for example, were in the past, how much variation, how many different morphologies, how many different things were there, And when we think of the human perspective, we think, okay, it's us, our relatives, our pets, and we see trees and we see insects and we see few things. But only when you go to the fossil record and to the geological rocks, you see how much life can change, um, for good and for bad in a sense, and how important it is. And also, I see paleontology an exceptional educational tool that is an ideal pathway to bring society closer to science. So I see paleontology as the perfect excuse to say to people, look, science is cool, come to it. If you wanted, you like fossils, become a paleontologist. There's nothing stopping you from being a paleontologist. You don't need to, um, be, from even young age, a kid who gets really enthusiastic about fossils. I didn't care about fossils. I didn't care about paleontology until my college time. I didn't like fossils. I didn't pay any attention. Like, uh, it was not part of my life, and only I discovered it in college, and then I got fascinated from it. But now that we have the opportunity to have events like this one on National Fossil Day, I think it's a great way to introduce people to a piece of science that is combines geology, biology, chemistry, in a sense, physics. To is the whole, all the sciences, all the natural sciences coming together, and I think that's what makes paleontology unique and special.
Do you do you remember what caught your eye in college for paleontology?
Yeah, actually, it's something to what we've been talking about. I have my third year in college. I have my first class in paleontology, and I have a professor. His name is Fernando Alvarez. He changed my life because he came one day to class and he starts showing a lot of enthusiasm. He's a world expert on brachiopods, and he starts showing a lot of enthusiasm about brachiopods, and that called my attention because it's like, well, these are boring fossils. Why he doesn't study trilobites? Why he's not passionate about trilobites or ammonites or something cooler? What's the passion behind brachiopods? They are boring. They don't do much. They just sit in the ocean floor. They filter water to get nutrients. What's about brachiopods? And just his passion and fascination for something that I thought was boring made me start looking into brachiopods and paleontology in general. He definitely changed my life. I mean, that's the classical example of a professor that makes the difference. So, that's what happened to me. That's what it got me into paleontology. Just wondering why somebody could be so crazy about something that looked so boring.
That is probably the best answer. That's fantastic. Because yeah, I mean, you're right. If you find that one person, passion is infectious. Some
Yeah.
enthusiasm can be infectious.
Yeah, and then I started loving brachiopods. I understand why he got so passionate about it, and I wanted to do a PhD to study brachiopods. People say we can offer you a fellowship to study origin of life or dinosaurs, and say no, that's boring. Give me that. Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah,
So if people are interested in learning a bit more about you, I think you said that you've got a website. Is that right?
yeah,
So I've you in the website says biomineralogy,
yeah. Okay.
mineralogy. Sorry, I think I said it
Yeah.
wrong. But what does that mean, real quick?
Currently, I focus my research more on biomineralization, and this is the process by which organisms, including us, we make minerals. And I study that throughout the whole geological history. So, for example, think of our teeth. Our teeth have mineral component. Our bones have minerals. So as humans, we produce minerals. If you think of a seashell, either it's for a brachiopod or for a clam, it is mineral. It's mineralized. So I study the ability of organisms to produce these minerals, how they manage to make them. How we can use that knowledge for applications in technology. How they get something as light as a shell and make it very strong. If you try to break a shell, it's very difficult to break, right? But then it's very light and the components are very cheap. So the question is, how do they get something so basic chemistry, very light, and they make something very strong? So that's biomineralization, biomineralogy. Um, and then I study that through geological history, and that includes fossils because they mineralize, and that's how we have them preserved. Things from, for example, dinosaur eggshells. We can study them. We can study chicken eggshells, and we can compare both of them, right? And the mechanisms of forming chicken eggshells and dinosaur eggshells is very similar. But we only discovered that recently, for example. So that's the kind of the research I do, and I call it geobiomineralogy because I look at these things from the geological perspective. Either I look at how brachiopods or trilobites were making their minerals, their eyes, for example, or their skeletons back in the Cambrian, but I look at modern organisms today as well, corals. Yeah, so that's my current research interest.
Very cool. Yeah, so we've put the link
Mhm.
to that website in the comment section. So if anyone
Yeah,
would like to check it out, please do.
yeah, and people
Um,
are happy to. I'm happy to entertain emails. So if they want to send me emails, I will be. Yeah,
That's great. Yeah, we weren't able to get to all of the questions in the comments today, so
yeah.
thank you for offering that because I'm sure people would love to continue the conversation with you. And I'll share the comments with you that we haven't had a chance to get to today,
Okay.
just so you've got those too. But I just want to thank you so much for being here and teaching us a little bit about Paleozoic oceans. I
Yeah,
learned a ton,
yeah,
and I know I'm sure everyone else did too that was watching.
yeah.
Um,
I had a
they're
blast. I'm passionate about paleontology. I like talking about it, and I will be happy to do this other time. I mean, it's been great, and I
Thank
really
you.
appreciate your work and effort.
It's a fascinating time. Paleozoic's fascinating.
Yeah,
So
it is.
yeah. So if you guys would like to, if you're watching and would like to reach out to them, check out that link that we put in the comments. And they can. It sounds like they can get your email there to
Yeah,
research or
yeah,
to reach out to you.
yeah.
Great.
Hmm.
Um, I also highly recommend if you guys are interested in this type of thing to visit your local library. There will be lots of great books on things like this, and a great resource for you. So that, and then if you have any other interests, reach out to people at the museum, and we'll see if we can help you, get some more information, or reach out to Alberto to see if he can get some more information to you too. All right. So I want to thank all of you for joining us today for our virtual National Fossil Day. Don't forget to share your fossil collections with us on social media. Make sure you use the hashtag National Fossil Day and hashtag My Collection. And don't forget to tag us at UAMNH on Instagram and Twitter. I also want to plug one more time the conversation that we have that you can sign up for a conversation with a paleontologist. We have 2 paleontologists that will be available for conversations tomorrow. That's Dr. Klompmaker and Dr. Ikejiri. You can sign up today by visiting the link at the Alabama Museum of Natural History page. Let me show you guys what that looks like when you get to the website so you can know where to go. So go ahead and click on that Virtual National Fossil Day link, and there you'll have the form that you need to sign up for a conversation with a paleontologist. If you have already done that today, I'm going to ask, we had some issues with the survey collecting results for some reason, but now it's all fixed. So if you've done that already, if you could please go back and fill out the form out for us one more time, we would greatly appreciate it. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. I will put my email in the comment box. And don't forget to join us for our 4 o'clock last presentation for Virtual National Fossil Day today. It's a very special presentation, the very first awarding of the first Alabama Avocational Paleontologist Award. It's a very exciting day. So don't forget to join us at 4 o'clock today for our last one. And thank you again, Alberto, for being here and joining us.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you, everyone, for all of your great comments and questions. All right, everyone have a great day. Happy National Fossil Day.